So in the last video, we created our modal component, which handles the opening and closing of the modal. Now what I want to do is have a component for the form that's inside of it, the form with these three inputs to create a new idea. So I want that component to render the HTML for that form. I also want it to handle the submission. And then later on, we're going to have like the username will be saved in local storage, and we'll have this get pre-filled with the username. So any functionality to do with this form should be encapsulated in the component. So let's create a new file in components called ideaform.js. And this is going to be a class of ideaform. And then we're going to have a constructor. And basically in the constructor, I just want to select the modal. So let's see, if we go into, where is it, index.html, we come down here, you'll see that there's a div with the ID of form modal. So I want to select that and make that a property. So let's say this dot underscore form modal, and then document dot, let's use query selector just to be consistent. So query selector, and has an ID of form dash modal. All right, and basically I want to insert the HTML from our JavaScript. So I'm going to grab the form and we're going to cut that. Okay, so in our HTML, all we have is this. And then in our idea form, let's create a function called render. So if you've ever used React, we're doing something similar that we would do in a React component, where we have our render, which actually outputs the HTML. So we'll take this dot underscore form modal, and let's set the inner HTML, and I'm just going to use backticks here. So we're going to set that to the form HTML. Okay. Now at the moment, if I were to, open the modal, the form is gone, obviously, because I removed it from the HTML. So we have to call this render. So what we'll do is let's first export the class. So we'll say export default idea form. And then in our index.js, let's bring it in. Just copy that down, and we want idea form. Okay, and then we're going to initialize it. So let's say const idea form, and then initialize a new idea form. And then I'm going to call, on that idea form object, I'm going to call render. So now if I come over here and we click, now we can see that the form is now being rendered. So the next thing I want to do is handle the submission, right? So when we submit this, ultimately we're going to make a call to our API to create a new idea, but for now we'll just console log whatever we type in the form, in the inputs. So in our idea form, we want to grab this, the form with the ID of idea form, because we want to add an event listener for a submit. So let's say this dot underscore form, and we'll grab it with document dot query selector, and it has an ID of, what is it? Idea form, idea dash form. Okay, and then we want to have an event listener on that. So let's go down here and say add event listeners, and on this dot underscore form, we're going to add an event listener for a submit. And when we call that submit, we're going to call a method called handle submit. So this dot handle submit, and we have to bind this keyword because this is on an event listener and a callback. Otherwise, if we don't do this, if we call this inside handle submit, it's going to pertain to the form itself, not the class. So we want to make sure that we bind that. All right, now if I come up here, we're going to have an issue if I say this dot add event listeners. So let's go ahead and open up the console. So it says cannot read properties of null, reading add event listener. So basically what it's saying is it's trying to read add event listener of something that is null. So this dot underscore form right now is null. The reason for that is because this dot form, which is the idea form, is not in the HTML anymore. We're rendering it from the component. We're rendering it from our JavaScript. And what's happening is we're trying to grab it with document.querySelector before it's actually rendered on the page. Okay, so what we can do is just move this, so where we select the idea form, and when we call the event listeners, we're going to cut that, and we're going to move that under render, okay, inside render right under it. So that way it renders first, and then we're selecting it, and then we're adding our event listeners. So if I save that, cannot read properties undefined. So we're just getting this error because we haven't created this handle submit yet, but you can tell it's working because it's actually trying to call handle submit, or trying to add that event listener. So let's just call, or let's create handle submit, pass in our event object. We want to prevent default, and for now let's just do a console.log, and we'll just say submit. Okay, so now that error is gone. Now I'm going to have an issue here. You'll see if I click in username, I get this error here. This has to do with LastPass, which is one of my Chrome extensions. So you can see it's talking about icons. So this has nothing to do with our application. It's not going to affect anything, and you won't see this on your machine unless you have, LastPass enabled. So just ignore that. So I'm going to click on submit, and if we scroll down, you can see we are getting our console log. So our event listener is hooked up. Now we want to be able to get the text that's passed in to these inputs. And there's a few ways we can do that. We could add, document query selector on each input, but we don't have to do that because we can access it right from the form element, from this dot form. So let me show you what I mean. And I'm going to create an idea object to be submitted to our API. And that's going to have text. So the way I'm going to get the text input is by saying this dot underscore form dot elements, and then the name of the input, which is text, and then the value. Now this is the name of the input, which if we look in our HTML down here, this is going to be the text area that has the name of text. Okay, so make sure that you have that in your input. You have name fields, name, username, and right here we have name tag. So that's how I'm able to get those using this dot form dot elements. So that it takes care of the text. Now let's do the tag. So this will be tag dot value, and we'll call this tag, and then this one is going to be username, and then form elements username. Okay, and then we'll just go ahead and, what happened? We'll just go ahead and do a console log of idea. So let's open this up, and just ignore that warning or that error that has to do with LastPass. So what's your idea? I'll say this is a test, and then for tag I'll say business. So let's go ahead and submit that, and now you can see that it's logging an object with tag business, our text, and then the username of Brad. Now, a couple things. When we submit, I want to clear the form fields, but I also want to close the modal, and that can be a little confusing because we have they're separate, right? We have our idea form component, which is completely separate from the modal. So what we can do to make this happen is dispatch a custom event from our form, and then basically listen for that event in the modal, and then close the modal when we submit. All right, so we'll do that, but first let's just clear the fields. So let's just we'll go under the console log here, and let's say clear fields. So we can say this dot underscore form dot elements dot text value, and set that to just an empty string, and then we'll do the same for the tag and the username. All right, so now I'm just going to put whatever in here. And then if I submit, you'll see that they go away. Okay, it logs them and then they go away. Now for the modal, like I said, what we're going to do is dispatch a custom event. So on the document object, there's a method called dispatch event. So that's what we're going to do is let's go down here and let's say document dot dispatch event. And the way we do this is we say new event, and you can call this whatever you want. I'm going to call it close modal. Okay, so now what we need to do is basically listen for this event in our modal component. So let's go over there, and in add event listeners, I'm going to add a new event on the document. So let's say document dot add event listener, and we're going to listen for close modal. And then when that happens, we're going to run this dot close, which is this right here, which will set the display to none. So let's try that out. We'll open this up, we'll type some stuff in here, we'll submit, and it closes. All right, and this dispatch event is very helpful if you're using modular code like we are and you're using vanilla JavaScript. This is something that comes in handy because it allows you to have your components interact with each other. All right, so I think the next thing that I want to do, now that we have the modal and form functionality down, I want to create a service, which is just going to be a class that interacts with our API to, you know, get the ideas to put on the page, to add them, and so on. So we'll do that next.